Hello and welcome to the 66th podcast. I am Steve and today I am joined solely by...
Ian, it's me.
Oh god, and I am suffering from some severe lag here, so apologies for that. Anyway, how are you, Ian?
I'm okay. I find it weird that you're starting to apologise for the lag thing. It's not just an internet thing. You do that in real life. I've seen you sort of sketch around a room,
Just move in slow motion.
jump into T-pose occasionally, sort of walk up against walls and just sort of glitch through the walls. That's just how you live your life.
Oh man, I don't even know how I do it. It's quite...
I think it's where you're part robot or part digital entity.
I'll go with digital entity. I think Daryl's our robot. I don't share that much in common with him.
He's more like a kitchen appliance. He's like a sort of a toaster that's smart enough to time your bread, but not smart enough to know that that time means it's burning.
Oh man, that's way more flattering than what I was going with. He's a robot in as much as he's like a potato masher or something like that. That's genuinely where my mind went to. Anyway, shall we get right on with some gaming stuff? We've got a few news stories here, so how about we jump into some news?
News.
Okay, right, to kick us off, we've got a little bit of Star Wars Armada news. Like with the Star Wars miniature stuff, you and Daryl especially are quite into the various forms of it, but Armada is probably your one you've played least, I imagine.
I would say that we're super into X-Wing, albeit on and off, and obviously we drag a bunch of people into X-Wing with us. We're like hyped about Legion as a concept and its figures, but play relatively few games of it.
Yeah.
And Armada is like the one that we all go, yeah, let's do that, and then never touch or do. And unless you're me and you time the purchase of new Armada stuff in tandem with their announcement to say that they're not releasing new Armada stuff, which, as much as it's not a like nail in the coffin, it's definitely prepping the grave, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the story that I'm going off of here, which was first published by Board Game Quest, so by all means go over there if you want to find out more about this story. But they do seem to suggest that a similar thing to this happened with Imperial Assault, and that died off fairly soon after they made any kind of announcement for it. So, like, they're suggesting here that you're still going to be able to get all the old models, but in terms of support of extending the game, they're ending it here, really. So
They've got previous on announcing stuff like this, and then not dying, but just not getting its regular support.
Yeah, pretty much. So one of the things I did want to bring up, but Daryl couldn't make it today, was that Daryl still has a pretty much unopened box of the core Armada set, I think.
I think he bought it as well, like around the time they released the core set.
Yeah, so that's been hanging around for a while.
I bought this. should you know? If I can figure out how my camera functions, yeah. I bought a Venator, so that I could start doing a Republic fleet, and it's like I almost waited until they decided that the game was no longer something they want to push forward with. But I have a lot of sympathy for it, because if you're making something for let's use 40k as an example, you can kind of make stuff up as you go, and they have done for like Primaris things, and they've sort of gone, oh look, they found this new STC, and now you can make rhinos with the hover vehicle stuff on it, and they can kind of make it up as they go because it's their IP. But in regards to Armada, you're kind of stuck with the IP that Star Wars provide for you, and big capital ships aren't something that come up a huge amount. I mean, they've been obviously Clone Wars and like stuff like Rogue One injected a fair few new ones to play with, and Rebels as well. But I just don't think there's ever going to be enough new Armada content, especially as the sequel trilogy isn't super loved. It's not like the prequels that have had their own fan base or anything like that, or that got revived by the Clone Wars or anything. People don't love that stuff as much, and so it's going to be hard to justify keeping Armada afloat by selling Snoke's flagship and things like that, because people just don't care as much. As much as I really like the First Order Star Destroyers, I don't think I'd buy them either. So, I mean, and also the sort of Resistance fleet isn't ever given loads of space and time because it shares a lot of ships with the Rebel fleet. So, I don't know. I don't think it's fully unexpected. It was never really the golden child, was it?
Yeah, I think there was always this whole thing of when Fantasy Flight moved the production of all their Star Wars things to Atomic Mass. I think there was a lot of talk of, oh, what's going to get cut? Why have they done this? And what's the purpose for it? I mean, I did speculate at the time that I felt like they were moving away from producing new things across the board with Star Wars stuff, but Legion and X-Wing is still very much active.
There's a lot of directions you can still go in with Legion. And I mean, X-Wing's probably coming towards the end of its tether, but I think every time they release a new program, individual ships will emerge. But when those characters come across an Imperial Remnant fleet or a Rebel cell, they use the same capital ships because there's not that many different types of capital ships. So, I mean, let's say Mandalorian, for example, they came across what was it called? There's one of the Imperial ships that they'd already had a model for, albeit people think it's a slightly larger size. It's going to bug me now that I can't remember its name. Moff Gideon's ship. But yeah, but at the same time, stuff like the Razor Crest, you can introduce that sort of stuff quite easily. You know, you could like what's it called, Bad Batch, which has been going on quite recently. They've introduced a couple of new ships in that as well. So it's safe to say there's a plethora of small ships you can still play with and add, albeit not many of them are particularly mainstream. You can't really do that with the capital ships. There's not enough background on it.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's one of these things. I think anyone, like you said, there's still enough to tap into there that people that are interested in
it's
X-Wing.
An Architects.
Okay.
It's an Architects light cruiser, which appears in Clone Wars as well.
Yeah. But
sorry.
I was just saying, I feel like fans of X-Wing and Legion that are still hoping to get more out of it, I don't think they're going to suffer the same fate.
No, but I mean, the level of detail they're going into with Legion is we're starting to see the Wookiee ships, like the Wookiee hovercraft things and flyers, and you know, when they're going into that much detail on Wookiees, which they appeared in Revenge of the Sith fairly heavily because of the Battle of Kashyyyk, you don't see loads more than that. So the fact they're going into that much detail on just that faction within the Republic / Alliance gives you a lot of hope for what they can achieve going around that. I'd be surprised if we didn't see Geonosian like foot soldiers for CIS and stuff like that. And there's still a few more different random droid types that they haven't played with yet. So yeah, I imagine we'll see like a crab droid or something.
Okay.
But there's still distance to go with that, whereas I don't think there was that much distance to go with Armada.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that Fantasy Flight tend to have a reputation that when something's getting old, they just release a new version of it, and you usually end up having to buy a load of upgrade kits and stuff like that, which I know the X-Wing community have already had to go through.
I think the difference with that is there was still new X-Wing stuff that they could legitimately release.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't think there's much new Armada stuff they could get away with releasing.
Mm. And let's face it, just because they're stopping mass production of this stuff, it doesn't mean you have to stop playing the game. Like just the other day, I've been talking with Daryl about playing Netrunner again. That's been long dead for a while. So, you know, it's always going to be there for anyone that is a little bit upset by this news. But
I think my advice to them would be um, pick up any sets that you 100% definitely want from your local, games retailer now. Not because they're going to stop making them, but because you know what some people are like. They'll end up on eBay or whatever for slightly more than that at some point.
yeah. Okay. Right, shall we move on then? The next one, I don't think there's an awful lot really to talk about here, but King of Tokyo has announced the Monster Box. So what this basically is a collection of all the different King of Tokyo releases. So they're bringing them all together into one package. If you've never played King of Tokyo before, it's largely considered as one of the games that you would use to try and bring new people into the hobby. It's quite colourful, there's big chunky dice in it, a lot of push your luck elements to it. It's essentially a last man standing thing where everyone's fighting over the over control of Tokyo. You also buy powers and stuff as well. The various dice rolls will do stuff like they'll either cause you to attack other players, or they can just out and out gain you victory points from the rolls, or you can start accruing currency, which, like I say, can be used to buy cards, which can give your character a few extra abilities, which is really cool. But yeah, there's not really been too much on a direction of King of Tokyo for a little while now. They released the Dark, which was kind of just a limited edition version of it that was a little bit more adult. It kind of lent more on the almost like the Godzilla aesthetic almost that it's obviously based on. So it's not as colourful, it's a lot darker. But this is just a neat way of bringing everything back together, and also includes a limited edition character in it that hasn't been obtainable very easily for quite some time. So if you're a fan of King of Tokyo, then by all means, this could well just round out your collection, because I know some of the expansion packs were a little difficult to get for a while as well. But it's a neat little product coming. If you've never played it before, it's probably a good jumping in point as well. So yeah, that is King of Tokyo Monster Box. I think you were saying before we went on air, you still haven't played King of Tokyo, Ian.
I've not played it. Obviously, I know Daryl's very fond of it. He plays it a fair amount. And I know you guys speak quite highly of it, but yeah, I've not had the chance yet.
Yeah, it's a decent game. But yeah, anyway, we've got one more item of news that we'll move on to now, and that is the Mind Sports Olympiad, which is going right now. It's actually going between the 13th of August and the 5th of September. So on release of this podcast, there's still a good week of this left. It's essentially the board game Olympics. You can kind of tune into events and stuff and watch what's going on. You can actually sign up for the events as well and play them. And it's not just your standard games that you would expect to be there. If I was to say that, you'd probably think, oh, there's going to be chess, there's going to be backgammon, there's going to be all those kinds of things. And yes, there are all those kind of things, including things like poker as well. But it does actually include Euro games and classic games as well.
There's underwater chess as well, wasn't there? I've just seen.
Yes, there was a weird underwater chess thing. So I don't know whether they're doing lots of different, like, odd events. Well, they obviously are, but it's just interesting to see that even in a lot of these games, you're looking at... they've got a Seven Wonders tournament. They've got a Catan tournament, Carnegie, Terra Mystica, Innovation. If you're after something a bit lighter, they've got a game of Takenoko going as well, a Takenoko tournament. So there's a lot of cool stuff there. Under the classic games, they actually show a big picture of Monopoly, which, God, why would anyone? Why would anyone? But it's it includes things like Awari and Go. Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff like that as well.
I think I might join.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know whether I'm going to play something like Monopoly, maybe Scrabble.
Yeah. Um,
I imagine being the Monopoly World Champion. What? You'd hate yourself, wouldn't you?
you would, yeah. Um, but we've also got Corto on there as well, which is a game that me and Daryl love. So, there's a lot of appealing stuff here. Like, what would you say you would want to see at something like this
Um,
that you feel like you could partake in?
what's the game with the doodah that I'm good at?
Crokinole.
Crocodile.
I,
I
I
want to play Crocodile.
So Crokinole was the thing that I had in my head. I'm thinking if a lot of this is done online this year, I am obviously that would be a tough one to do, but certainly I would love to see something like that. I would be happy to partake in something like that as well. Yeah, like just in general, this is something that looks very, very interesting and it appeals to me as well. Apart from that, I mean, have you got anything to add to this at all?
What in the Olympiad stuff?
Yeah,
I think it's nice to see competition theatre branch out into something less physical.
yeah, yeah. That's
But I mean, it's been going on for a while. I was vaguely aware of its existence, but it's nice to see it get some traction.
yeah. So by all means, go and check out mindsportsolympiad.com. And that is all the news we have got this week. So we'll be moving on to what we've been playing. Hello, and we are on to what we've been playing. And first up, we have got Aeon's End. And me and Ian, we beat that Prince of Gluttons this time round. Do you want to talk about it a bit, buddy?
Yeah. I haven't been able to not think about losing to the Prince of Gluttons. It's been really bugging me. Just like when my mind goes into autopilot, it's been, do you know what, we could have done this. If we had this spell, if we used this synergy correctly, we could have beaten him. And that's been bugging the hell out of me. So when Steve asked what we wanted to play, I was like, Joe, I don't mind, but I'd love to have a go at Prince of Gluttons again. And as in a two-player one, we had almost the perfect ability combo, didn't we? I think we got to a point where the next turn was either win or lose, depending on who went next, and we were just lucky enough that it was one of us that went next. Yeah. And then from that point onwards, we controlled the game and won. Yeah. So you were I can't remember what your character was called, but you're like the blacksmith character?
Yeah, the one that could protect us from the nasty happenings. I could deflect, sorry, I could stop one boss attack from even going off at all. That was my ability. And
I was the edgelord character that gave you 4 charges, so that you could use that ability. So basically, all we did towards the end game was feed my character so that I could feed your character.
Yeah.
And just feed each other charges so that we could keep you charged, so you could defend us, so that I could use spells to do the damage. It was. I think it worked really well. I think there were a couple of misplays, which I remember them happening whilst we were playing, and me going, if I'd just not done that, we would have done this, and it would have been fine. But it all worked out in the end. I think we were one boss thing off losing, weren't we?
We were, yeah. But
so if we'd let it slide, if we'd done one more thing wrong, we would have lost. Which is, one thing that's really good about my character is I could change the order in which things appeared. So the turn order for everyone. So I could make it so that the Nemesis went, then me and Steve went, and then the Nemesis went, so that they didn't get 2 turns off in a row. So we could charge Steve and make it so he was useless. I think it worked really well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think makes me like this game even more, I know it has the option to randomize all the spells and stuff like that, but having lost to the boss once, we were able to sit down and plan beforehand which spells were going to help us most. So putting those out, because I hate to say it, but beating this boss with a random selection of cards and characters just wouldn't work, because you need to figure out how to beat him, and we figured out
There's
a very
yeah, there's a level of synergy that you need to stop him doing what he needs to do to win,
yeah.
which you'd have to be lucky to get from randomizing it.
But also, it makes you feel real clever at the end of it when you know that you've picked all the spells and stuff that you think are going to be useful for this. You've picked the right characters to get you through this. I think there's a certain level of achievement in that, and you've almost got to take a loss sometimes against these bosses in order to learn what you've got to do for next time. So it almost challenges you to learn the game better, I think. Which is kind of cool. I quite like that. It's a game that requires a certain degree of study to it, which is quite nice, which works for a co-op game, I think.
Yeah, I think also when looking at the characters and what they did, I think we very quickly got to a point where we were like, cool, so these guys are good, these guys are complete garbage.
Mm.
And like they must have their use at some point, but we couldn't. It wasn't appropriate for the one we were fighting, and obviously when that's randomly distributed, you must think, God, this guy's ability is meaningless.
Mm.
But I think obviously the one that buffs it or changes the turn order and gives everyone else charges is so strong.
Mm.
I can't imagine a scenario where you wouldn't want that.
Yeah, I mean, if we go back to what we were talking about on the last podcast, which was kind of how this boss works. Like, for a start, Aeon's End is it's a cooperative deck building game where everyone is basically fighting off one boss monster before it destroys the town that you're trying to protect. So we actually mentioned before how your menu of spells that you have almost acts as a countdown timer against this boss, because one of the rules is if you run out of cards for him to devour, then it's game over, and the amount of cards you've got are the cards that you're actually buying from. So it was interesting to play a deck building game where by the end of it I'd only bought 5 cards, but I planned exactly which cards I wanted to buy, and we were hitting points where we were actually saying between us, right, we've got enough of these cards in between our 2 decks now, let's just leave that here. And I think you even mentioned that you probably bought 1 or 2 more cards than you should have.
Yeah, there was a point where we were going. I think I had to shuffle my deck based on the ability he had, and I sort of, as I was shuffling it, I was looking at how many cards I had, and I just thought I've overbought here.
Mm.
But I think I overbought in areas that I don't know. I think it's more that there's obviously usually cards that allow you to remove things from your deck, and we didn't have that. Because we thought it's more important we have what's right for when we buy it, and we're not going to be buying a lot. But I know I had 2 of the most powerful spell that we picked, and that was enough. And then I had 3 of the spell that opens all of your spell slots.
Yep.
Which I remember thinking, that was the point where I was like, I could have done with 2 of these rather than 3. And it doesn't seem like a lot, but it was an extra... You know, it would have been an extra thing that he could have eaten rather than our town.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. This time, Gravehold never really struggled in this one. Our struggle was against what cards we had left on the table. That was because we ended the game with only 3 cards left in our menu, and considering that in a 2-player game, he devours 3 cards. So the next time he unleashed, which is where he gets to devour cards, we would have been game over anyway. So even with all that forward planning and stuff, and admittedly we're still new to this game, we still cut it very fine with him. He would have beaten us if he got one more turn in. I mean, we developed a system where we could nullify pretty much every single one of his attacks, providing the turn order was coming up okay. We had
my character allowed us to play with the turn order though, so it's sort of we almost had it exactly perfect.
The thing is that there was always the chance that they could get a turn in where they wouldn't have protection. And it happened in the last maybe 5 or 6 rounds. They only really got one turn in. We were able to actually control what he was doing and stuff. Like, despite the fact that we only had 3 cards in there, we were still quite comfortable at the time. But it was just that one moment of misfortune would have ended us, basically.
Yeah, so if the Nemesis went before I could go,
Yeah,
then we struggled, because obviously as soon as I went, I changed the turn order.
yeah, that's right. But yeah, how are you feeling about Aeon's End now? Like, are you still enjoying it just as much?
I'm still super enjoying it. I'm satisfied at the minute. Like, if you said to me, like, next time I came over that we weren't playing Aeon's End, I wouldn't be like, no, we must play it, which is probably how I would have reacted last time if you told me we weren't playing. I was like, no, we've got to beat this guy. I guess now I haven't seen the next boss yet.
I think
so
this
I'm
is
not,
the thing.
like, hyped for it, I guess.
It's when we lose to the next boss that you'll get the whole, I need to play this again now. Like, trying to figure out how we can beat the next one. Like, it was pretty easy to identify what the plays were for the Prince of Gluttons. Like, I think we all saw it in the game where we lost, as to why we lost, and let's be real honest here, how badly we lost that as well, because
Yeah, I mean, I would also go so far as to say that that was entirely Daryl's fault.
well, you know, the proof at the moment is that he's not there, and we did it this time.
It's not a coincidence, mate. No Daryl, and we get the W. You know,
certainly do. Okay,
relation.
So really, we're hoping to play more of this, really, and try out more of them. We're halfway through the starter box now, but there are a ton of expansions for this thing, including a legacy version of it as well. That one, I'm not so sure whether I'm going to get the legacy version, only for the sake of the fact that I already have about 3 legacy games that we've still got to play through. And they're just huge time commitments, and I'm quite enjoying this just as a standalone play as you go along kind of thing.
There's a part of me that's really keen to play the legacy version.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, we're still halfway through a legacy game.
Yeah, we've still got
Betrayal.
Betrayal.
Haven't finished it.
Yeah, we still have that. And then I've got Gloomhaven sat around still, just really waiting for a group of, that is able to play it regularly to be able to play it with. I started Jaws of the Lion, which I just started to play on my own, and it's amazing. But, really want to get on Gloomhaven, because Frosthaven's coming out fairly soon as well, which is kind of like the next level of that. So, yeah, apparently...
I mean, I'm very up for it.
Yeah, I am as well. I'm really up for getting into Gloomhaven. It's like, I would say I ideally would want 3 of us to be able to play it at a bare minimum out of the 4 players. And even then it would be like you'd have to quite regularly get into it. I think unlike Betrayal, which is quite easy to pick up again, like you can be out of it for a while and then jump back into it quite easy. Gloomhaven is... I think it would be very easy to forget what you're doing, and it's so story-driven as well that you may be starting to lose out on key plot elements and stuff like that after a while, just from where you spend time away from it. You know, it really feels like Gloomhaven is a real proper commitment, like an RPG, basically, where you ideally want to be playing at least once every 2 weeks. Like, it is like, mind you, there are some, you hear about RPG groups that only play once a month and stuff like that. It's not uncommon, I suppose. But it's even at the moment, I'm not confident at the moment I could get a group to be able to consistently play it once a month at the moment. I don't think. And that's really where the problem lies.
I know what you mean. It's having everyone... as grown-ass adults, getting everyone free at the same time to do the same thing is harder than it looks.
Yeah, it really is. Anyway, shall we move on now? From Aeon's End to another thing we talked about last week. It's Arkham Horror, because, man, I wish I had Daryl here to talk about this with me, because he always can. He can talk the leg off Arkham Horror for a good, like, 45 minutes, which probably isn't such a good thing with the technical difficulties we're having here today, but hey. Yeah, so we mentioned that me and Daryl were going to kind of like an organised play event for Arkham Horror, where they were playing the Blob That Ate Everything. So it's one of the individual scenario packs that get released for Arkham Horror. There has been another one since, which I think was the War of the Outer Gods, I think. So this is the second most recent event pack. And it's interesting because you start off the game with every single location in play. And over the course of the game, they are going to become oozified. And there's an event that comes out that if you're on an oozified location, you start taking damage. So it kind of forces you to move about the board in a very certain way. Unlike other games of Arkham Horror as well, the blob isn't an enemy in itself. It keeps splitting up into different parts, and then it fractures off, and then you damage the individual parts, and that puts damage on the blob, who had 70 health, I think, or something like that. And every so often there'll be the blob's heart will appear somewhere, and you've got one turn to be able to pile in as much damage as possible into that heart before it goes away and you can't deal any more damage. So for something with 70 health, most of the enemies you'll be fighting in this game, and there's usually only a handful of them on the game state at the time, they'll only take about 3 or so damage, so you'll only be damaging the blob like for 3 health per go, and then there's no other way of damaging it. You basically have to wait for this heart to come up, and the only way to get it up is there's a sequence of events you have to go through. So I'm trying to think what the order was of it now. It was, first of all, you have to gather clues, I think, which is generally something that's quite a standard thing in Arkham Horror games. And then that summons up the heart. The heart appears, you damage the heart. The blob then splits up into lots of little bits. You fight through them, and then you start the cycle all over again. So you have to start collecting clues again. So it gets harder and harder and harder as it goes on, because the next time the blob's heart comes up, you've probably got these other blobs still hanging around on the board somewhere. Some of them might have hunter abilities or something like that. You also get different enemies that get introduced into the deck as it goes on as well. So in this case, we had Amigo turn up, which made life difficult for us. But there's also events that start happening. So at the end of each cycle, once the blob has split up into lots of little parts and the heart has gone away and you've damaged it as much as you can, you then get an event at the end of it. So like we had a load of explosives turn up, and if any of us had been on any of those spaces when they'd have blown up, we would have taken massive damage, basically. It was interesting. It was a very, very combat-focused event. I was actually playing as a support character, so I was kind of useless. I had one thing in my arsenal that I could use in my hand, and it only came up on the very last turn that we had before we actually managed to successfully destroy the blob. But generally, it was a very fun event. They had 2 groups of us that were both playing at the same time, and both groups actually managed to beat the blob, which was nothing short of a miracle, I think, because it's more difficult than it sounds, especially when you consider like cycling through your cards and things like that, and going through the 3 different phases and then having to restart it and going through it again and again and again and again. Like we did it as well, managing to hit the heart when it comes up, because the heart's damage is doubled, and we hit it for 15 damage, which was as much as you can hit on it on both turns in a row. So that dealt about 60 odd of the damage on it, but we had a couple of nasty things turn up as well, like the blob was healing itself. But there's a lot of fun little things that happen in the game as well, because there's an event that happens where you have to draw 2 chaos tokens from the chaos bag, and then you've got a chart which gives you a load of events that happen, and that's where the blob starts eating stuff. Like it might say like the blob eats so many assets from your hand or something like that, and it goes underneath the blob character, and the blob starts getting more and more powerful the more stuff it's eating. But it also had stuff that just screw around with you. Like if you were lucky enough with the draw out the chaos bag, like what happened with me, it said the blob eats the sleeve to your character card or something like that. Not my character card, the sleeve. And I didn't actually have a sleeve, so it just didn't eat anything. And the idea is you unsleeve it, you put your sleeve underneath that. But we had one event that literally came just after lunch, and because there was a mix-up with Daryl's lunch order, we ended up having to start playing when he already had his lunch there. And the very first event we got off that was any players with food and drink around the table aren't allowed to eat until a certain amount of time's passed. So he was absolutely starving because he'd not eaten for ages and his lunch order had turned up late. And then the first thing we get is, hey, you can't eat that, which was amazing. Really enjoyed that, but it was a real fun day. We got a few freebies out of it. Like, it's the standard thing, you get a few promo cards, but we also got each like 5 deck boxes each as well, which was kind of cool. Just standard cardboard things, but it's a nice little extra just for turning up to that. So yeah, that was a really fun day. I think they're going to be doing one for the War of the Outer Gods in the future. So we're keeping our eye out and hopefully going to attend that one because that was real good fun. So if you see any Arkham Horror events in your area, they are actually standard packs that they actually send to your various hobby stores, and they'll organise the events themselves. Yeah, check them out if you're into your Arkham Horror because they are very, very good fun. Okay, moving on to our last game of the evening. It's been a very short podcast today, and it's probably for the best because we're having, like I said before, a ton of technical issues. Probably not showing up so much for our podcast listeners at home. Hey, you've gotten off lightly. The people watching on YouTube, sorry about this.
Also, you could, there is too much of a good thing. That is a thing that happens, isn't it? You don't want to spoil yourself.
Yeah,
sure.
You
have a slightly shorter podcast, leaves you hungry for next time.
Exactly.
We're treating you mean to keep you keen.
And our last game to talk about is Cubitos, which is a neat little racing game that's also kind of like a dice bag building game. I've seen it described as like Quacks of Quedlinburg meets like Flamme Rouge or something like that. You've got your track which you're going around. I wouldn't say it's quite got the in-depth race mechanics of Flamme Rouge, and I'll get on to the comparison to Quacks of Quedlinburg because I think you've got something quite yeah, like you've got a good point to make about this game when we get to it. But essentially, you do. You said about it when we actually played the game. But the idea is, you've got your track set out, and you have your starter dice. The idea is you roll your dice. You may roll a number of ones or numbered rather than saying ones, because some of them will have 2 on, some of them will have 3 on, or they'll roll footprints. If you rolled nothing, then you bust, providing you haven't already taken 3 dice with symbols already on. So the idea is you roll your dice, any symbols you roll get moved into an active area, and then you can choose whether you want to re-roll them again and get more materials to be able to take your turn. The idea is if you have at least 3 dice in your active zone and you roll your dice and you roll nothing, then you bust automatically. You lose all your dice, including your ones that are currently in your active zone. And if you've rolled a whole load of blanks and then you roll a whole another load of blanks, regardless of whether you have 3 in your active zone or not, again, you bust and you lose any dice you've got. At the end of the turn, you've got a number of dice piles around the table, all of which are different coloured and all hold different abilities. You can then spend your various number tokens, which add up to a cash value. You can spend that cash then on various dice around the board, and your footprints become movement points to move you around the board. The idea is you actually move fairly slowly at first. Like you're probably only going to be moving 1 or 2 spaces at first. Then a lot of the dice you're buying, like in the example we had a dice called Smelly Cat, which would allow you to move 2 spaces if you rolled the right face on it. There was also a dinosaur, I've forgotten his name now, but he allowed you to move up to 4 spaces should you roll that face on the dice. Then there's other things that give you more abilities. We had things like the Rich Dog, which gave you more money to spend should you roll it, but you lose the dice afterwards. The Red Dice, which had swords on, which were kind of neat little thing where you had to have more, in order to activate, you had to have more swords than your opponent. And then you got like some extra cash, you got some movement, but you lose your red dice afterwards, and that goes back into its pile. So, like I say, you're building a hand of elite dice, I suppose, and you're trying to roll them. And there are spaces on the board as well, which can have various effects, like they can let you discard dice. So if you want to get rid of some of your starter dice, you can get rid of that. So very much like a deck building game or something like that. So I got quite a lot of enjoyment out of this. Like I generally tend to like race games anyway. I like the idea of it being a bag building thing. There's a few dice that I really like that are risky to take. Like I had the Relentless Cheese dice, which is great if you roll it in your first roll. Because if you roll that, every time you re-roll your dice, as long as you're not busting, you get to move a space each time. But if it's the last thing you roll on your last one, it's pretty useless. It has to be moved to your active zone, and then you lose it overall at the end. There were also some other interesting dice. I've forgotten what the orange one was called on there. It was called the Dugout or something like that, where you got to take 3 dice that are in your draw zone because you have a hand limit to how many dice you can roll in a turn. It allows you to take 3 dice that are in your draw zone and roll them into play as a free roll as well. If you bust on that, doesn't matter. It's a free roll anyway. It has no effect. So that can be quite useful if you've got too many dice but haven't been able to discard enough yet. But these abilities I'm talking about, they were only relevant to our game that we were playing, because the game actually comes with a load of cards which allow you to customize your game. So the Smelly Cat dice that I was talking about before, your next game you might decide, I'm going to take that card out and I'm going to replace it with this one, and now it does something else instead. So the white dice have a different function at that point, so you can change up your game a bit. I think the one we started with generally tends to give you quite a lot of movement, which kind of played into one of the things you said about this game. Did you want me to remind you what you said about the game?
Is it me saying that we could have done with another lap?
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, I felt like the game was over fairly quickly. Me and Steve, both being smart chaps, picked well in order to build finance and then build what we needed to move around the board quickly. And then there was just one turn where I was about 2/3 the way round, and I think I rolled 2 of the dinosaurs, which gave me 4 movement each, and then 2 Smelly Cats, and then a couple of other movement bits.
You had 14 movement by the end of it.
I had 14 movement total, because I also had the red one appear, which gave me a couple of movement as well.
Yep.
And I went round half the board in a turn.
Yeah.
And the game was over. And I just remember thinking at that point, cool, this would be fun if Steve had a chance to fight back, to put some, if he had the money for it, put some money into something that he could catch up with me for. Yeah. Or, and also he would have had a bigger dice pool because I was so far ahead of him. He might have been able to catch up to me. But obviously at that point, there was a point in where I had a turn to buy stuff, and I looked at what was left to buy and went, yeah, I don't need any of this.
Yeah, I mean,
I sort of don't want any of this because it's just going to dilute my hand, because we'd run out of Smelly Cat. I couldn't afford any more dinosaurs, so yeah, I feel like the game was the perfect length, and I'm whinging about nothing, but it did feel like a lot of setup for what was a quick little fun game.
it would be interesting to see how this plays with other card types in there. Like we've only played with the first standard one, which is obviously aimed at the whole thing of there's a really obvious meta to this. All you do is gain things that will get you currency at the beginning in order to then be able to buy all these amazing movement things and then zoom around the board. That is essentially how it went. I wonder whether there's other setups where it's a little bit more tricky. Like, I know there are some in there that, you know, you have a lot of weirder stuff. Like, when you bust in the game, if you lose all your dice and stuff, but you move up on the fan track, I know there's definitely things which give you more movement depending on how far you are up around the fan track. So there may actually be some motivation to deliberately fail your rolls in order to then start moving around whenever you get this certain face on there. So there's a lot of stuff like that we haven't really seen that yet. We've only really seen the basic starter one. The reason why I think this doesn't encourage you to do more laps, because there's nothing to stop you from doing it. Like, just say, yeah, let's just play a 2-lap game. But I think the reason why they don't encourage that in the rules of the game is because after 1 lap, all the smelly cat dice had been bought. So that is one type of dice completely gone by that point. And the argument could almost be made that if we wanted another lap in order to see whether I could catch up with you, by that point in the game, once all the smelly cats are gone, I would have to save up for the very expensive 4 movement dice to give me any chance of being able to catch up with you at all. I think, if anything, your lead would have just been even bigger, I think, by the end of it.
I think I was very lucky with the dinosaur dice, the 4 movement dice I got. Because I rolled a few at the end of the game, didn't I, to see how likely it was that I got what I got. And so I rolled both of my dinosaur dice twice. So the first time I rolled 2, and I got none. And I didn't get any in my first roll of them, and I moved on. And then the second turn I used them, I got both, which obviously gave me 8 movement. I then rolled it about 10 to 20 times. I just had a good roll, and I think I got 2 more dice in that time. So the fact that I managed to get 2 in one turn seems to be quite yeah, I mean, it's a 1 in 6 chance to get one. So to get 2, you know, the odds, you know, aren't in your favour for getting it both at the same time.
I mean, like I said, I took a chance on a reckless cheese as well, which didn't come off for me once over the entire game. I think I only actually rolled the face once, and it was so close to the end of my roll,
it was
so
your
it
last
made no
turn.
difference. Yeah, it was my last turn, and I think I think I busted, didn't I, on my last turn? Because I think, if I remember correctly, I just said to myself, well, I've got to get some use out of the reckless cheese dice, or I only had 3 left, and it wasn't. Maybe that was it.
You decided not to. I don't think either of us busted.
Yeah, I think I only had 3 dice left, and they were all either light grey or dark grey ones, which are your starter dice, and it wasn't worth running the risk just to get 1 extra movement out of it. Like, it really didn't make sense
unless you're me and you decide that you're not paying attention and that you'll just keep rolling dice whilst you're chatting to Steve.
and getting every single one.
Get every single dice just by luck.
So, in order to get the most out of that, on the last turn, I would have had to have rolled 1 out of the 3 with a symbol on 3 times in a row in order to get 3 movement out of it, in order to get the most out of it. And the odds of rolling just a single face, like, I couldn't roll 2, because otherwise 2 dice would go away and I'd only be able to roll 1 dice the other time. My only hope for that, which still, like I said, it still wouldn't have been enough to catch up to you, but my only chance was those 3 dice. I roll all 3 once, only 1 symbol, get to move them forward 1 space, and then I'd have to repeat it another 2 times, only rolling 1 symbol each time. The odds of doing it just weren't worth it. Like, the odds just weren't there, like, at all. But, like, it's interesting. Like, I really like this game. I think the biggest problem I can see with it, and I'll say this is the big problem beyond what you said, is that you have to be willing to get 3 or 4 plays out of this, because it takes a long time to set up for essentially a game that really only takes about 10 minutes to play. Like, I think it took a bit
Problem
longer
for
with
me,
us.
I don't think playing the same set of dice each time is enjoyable. Like you after that first game, you'd want to change what everything does, right?
Oh yeah, but that would only take a
No, I know it
moment
wouldn't
to
take
do.
long. But how many different combos could you get and keep it interesting?
Well, the game alone offers you about 20 different combinations, I think, of cards that you can have on there. It's quite a lot, and that's only the ones that they give you. So there, I can't remember how many there are of each card, but I think there's about 6 or 7 of each coloured card. So the amount of different combinations you can have is huge. Like there is genuinely a large amount, but in terms of the more balanced sets that they give you, they offer you about 20 different combinations of cards to put out there. But there's no reason why you wouldn't want to just go away and just experiment a little bit. And yeah, um, I think that's it. Is like in terms of the actual game itself, I really enjoy it. I think it's really good. I don't think it's up with either Quacks of Quedlinburg or Flamme Rouge. Like, I would still rather play one of those two over this for the two main elements that it's really addressing in this game.
I wonder if you asked me to set up Quacks and asked you to set up that, how what the time difference would be.
Yeah.
I feel like they've both got similar setup times.
Yeah, perhaps so. But at the same time, Quacks is... It takes a lot longer to play Quacks compared to
It
this.
does.
Quacks is a good, like, 30 to 45-minute game, I would say. Quacks could be your main game of the evening, just with playing a single game of it. Whereas Cubitos, in order to make it your centerpiece game of a gaming evening, you would have to have 3 or 4 races of it. And that's the only way I'd want to play this, because, like I said, the setup time is so huge. To set it all up just to get one playthrough of it is... It's not worth it to me at all.
No, I agree. Yeah.
So I think that's a... Like, I think the majority of people will enjoy playing this, and I enjoy playing this. But the amount of people who will play one game of it and then happily go, yeah, I'm up for playing another game of it, I think you'd have a dwindle of people. Like, it would dwindle off the number of people that would want that. Personally, I would like to.
Yeah.
I've always had this whole thing of I'd quite like to play Flamme Rouge and play a campaign game of Flamme Rouge. And I think the same goes with Cubitos as well. It plays so quick that I never like to be the overbearing voice of what we're playing during game nights. And I would quite happily say I want to play 3-4 games of this, but I would never want to force that on someone. And I think there would be people within the game group that after one race would say, yeah, I fancy playing something else now. At which point you cry into your drink because you've spent ages setting it up. And it's not got a horrific setup time. I won't say that. Essentially, it's a case of organising all the dice and stuff like that into their towers and stuff like that you have, because it's got these little cardboard towers which are actually quite flimsy, and you're meant to put all your dice on top of them, but the towers kind of give you information like how many what are the faces of the dice and stuff like that. So there's information on them for the players basically. But anyway, that's Cubitos. It does come close to a recommendation for me, but I feel like it does just fall a little bit too short, I think. How about yourself?
Yeah, I think I found it fun. I didn't hate it at all.
Yeah.
But I also think that the circumstances of the game we played change how I think of it, because I've only played it once.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like there's elements that would have been different had we played it a couple more times. So I think it's hard to judge a game on one play, but in my head there's complaints that I feel like I don't think they might not be valid complaints.
Sure. It all depends on how things go in your next few games, I suppose, of it.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, cool. Anyway, with that brings us to the end of this podcast. So thank you very much for joining us. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please don't forget to give us a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We're also available on social medias. You can find us on Twitter at EverybodyDice and on Instagram at Everybody Dice Show. We've also got a Facebook page, which is just down there, facebook.com/everybodydice. And yeah, there are probably going to be some things on screen around about now. Please do feel free to click those and watch some more of our videos. That would help us out greatly. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us on this version of the podcast, and we shall see you next time. Bye.
Goodbye.